All right, so my name is Alex with On Point TC. Today is April 20th of 2022, 6 o'clock in the evening. Still light out, but it's kind of cool and clear. It was hot a few days ago. Hit like 95, 100 degrees some time ago. But let's go and start the recording. This is part one of two. So we'll be doing this part this week, and then part two we'll be doing next week of title and ownership. And I thought this presentation was important, mainly because it gives a thorough explanation of where ownership came from and why it exists, and what is it exactly. So title refers to what most of us are familiar with as title insurance, but that's actually a different presentation. When I talk about title, what we're talking about is ownership to a property. So that's what I mean by title. So title and ownership covers little of title insurance, which is a totally different animal. And Larry here can attest to that. So let's go ahead and get started. 6:03, there is 21 slides to this presentation. So I'm thinking we should be done on time. So let's go ahead and take care of our bumper information. So here's my information, email address, phone number. The website is currently down, but I should have it up hopefully in the next month or two. Please mute yourself on your side just to avoid any background noise, so we can keep from having any distractions during the presentation. I will mute you on my end, but if you care to chime in at any time, feel free, okay? I will try and get to your questions in the chat room after each slide, but I will also ask. But like I said, feel free to chime in anytime or raise your hand, and I'll try to get to your question concerning the subject matter or any other matter for that matter after class, okay? Thank you guys for logging in on time today and or early, just so we can get done on time. None of us like to stay, on the meeting until after 8 o'clock, right? So let's try to keep it to where we can maybe get off 7:15, 7:30, okay? And then feel free to share the link with anybody that you feel might benefit, and or give them the link to the channel, which is free. I would just ask that you have them subscribe to the channel so we can get credit for the views, okay? So any questions or comments so far? All right, so let's get started, right? So items covered in this presentation will be, and it's what I call the Caveman Effect, or the evolution of ownership, right? The origin of landlords and the history and concept of it. Human rights, we'll do a short history lesson on human rights. The fight for ownership, right? In terms of, hey, there was people that died so we can have the current system that we have today, right? Police power, which includes the justice system, law enforcement, and legal counsel. The creation of the municipals, or cities and or counties, including states. Rights in realty, or instruments in writing required for recording. And that typically is what we would see in terms of how we could prove something. And it goes back to what I always say, it's not what you know, it's what you can prove, all right? So that's what we'll be covering today. Any questions or comments before we get started? All right, so let's keep moving. So why did the human race develop the concept of ownership in the first place? So the concept of ownership substantially predates human beings. Try taking a bone away from a dog sometime and you'll see what I mean. Humans have more sophisticated interactions with each other and have taken the concept of ownership in many different directions. Some have pushed it to the forefront, where the most powerful individuals take the largest portions of the resources. Others have focused more on community with things held in common. Even societies supposedly without ownership have at least some notion of it. Unless they are completely isolated, different groups will try to take resources from each other, and groups will fight to defend their own resources. And even in the most ownership-oriented cultures, it is common for at least some groups of people to own things in common, such as families, right? So the differences are matters of scope and scale, but the same factors are present in every culture. So I thought it was interesting. Try taking a bone away from a dog sometime and you'll see what I mean, right? Is because the dog thinks he owns the bone, right? Even though you might own the bone, the dog still thinks he owns it. So any questions or comments on that? So here's what I call the caveman effect, and I thought this was a little interesting. As early as the first human dwellers of the earth, the need for ownership was necessary to survive. Even animals protected their territory in some areas. Weather, food, resources, topography are some of the reasons some valued certain areas of the world. What was the only way that humans could have any real ownership of anything at that time? Anybody know the answer to that? What was the only way that humans could have real ownership of anything at that time? Because there was no such thing as cities or county recorders or deeds or grant deeds. There was no such thing. So how could a caveman or how could a primitive man have ownership of anything at that time? Anybody? All right. So pretty much it was just through force. How much how much how much of your might can you afford, right, to take ownership of something in terms of whether it be, let's say, a cave, a dwelling, something that maybe that you built, these things can be taken away, right? Was there any way to defend your position if you ended up losing a fight for a piece of land or area? And really, it was only to retaliate, right? But there was really no way to defend it. So any questions or comments on that? Because that's a pretty interesting concept. Most of us take this for granted. And this is why we have the systems that we do in place. And one of the main reasons why we even have a career is because of this concept, right? The concept of ownership. Any questions or comments? So let's take a quick history lesson, okay? So the landlord, right? That fixed portion, food, not money, was the serf's rent. And the rent literally fed the lord and his household. We now see the historical origin of the term landlord. Originally then, rent was actual produce from the land and linked entirely to the land, not to a building or a part of it, right? A part of the building. It actually had more to do with the fact that this person, or we'll just call them, what they called in the historical text, they call them serfs, but let's just call them a tenant. The way that they could stay on property is simply to work the land, and hence the word landlord became the term of the person who owned the land. So the serf, an agricultural laborer bound under the feudal system to work on his lord's estate. So he was the serfs were they were they were there voluntarily, right? But actually what they were doing is they were working for room and board. So what is another word for serf, right? And the word actually that I'm looking for really is a tenant, right? Some of us might confuse this activity with slavery, but that's a little different, so we won't talk about that. And mainly because what we're talking about here is landlords, and the other side of the tortilla, from my side of town, is the tenant. So the present day meaning, a landlord is the owner of a house, apartment, condominium, land, or real estate, which is rented or leased to an individual or business who is called a tenant. And let's let Lupe in here real quick. Also a lessee or renter. When a juristic person is in this position, the term landlord is used. And so there hasn't been a new term derived because of this. So we still use it today, and we're all pretty familiar with that term. But just to kind of give you an idea of where the term came from, the word landlord literally meant that that person owned a piece of land, and then there was people that were working on the land in order to sustain their own survival, if you will, whether it be place of residence, room and board, that kind of thing. But they pretty much had the labor there to pay their rent. Any questions or comments on that? So continuing on with the history lesson, the belief that everyone, by virtue of his or her humanity, is entitled to certain human rights is fairly new. Its roots, however, lie in earlier tradition and documents of many cultures. It took the catalyst of World War II to propel human rights into the global stage and in the global conscience. There were some fundamental differences in beliefs in various cultures. To narrow it down, there were some that believed that resources should be taken by force, while others believed in peaceful approach. Really no different than the discussion of the caveman. The only differences include the population and technology advances in weaponry. The need and want for peace and value of human life has created a necessity of a peaceful system of ownership. So just so we understand each other, things weren't always as nice as what we have now in terms of peace, because what was happening in the world as early as 100, 120 years ago is that if somebody wanted something, they would simply just come and take it. And if they had the ability to do that, there was no way to stop them. Okay, so we have a system now in place that does stop people from doing that. And there's probably people caught every day that are trying to do that, whether it be personal property and or even real property that is potentially stolen and causes problems within the system. But like mentioned here before, it's a fairly new concept. So when we're talking about World War II, that was in the 1940s. So we're talking about roughly 80 years ago. So that's not that long ago that the concept of human rights actually came more to the global front, whereas needing a system that would work that's peaceful. Any questions or comments on that? So the evolution of man has not entered a conscious ability. Ownership is has now entered a conscious ability. Ownership is a human right that should be realized by anyone and be able to do so peacefully, right? But how do we do that? So this is where now the majority of us are familiar with some of the things that accompany ownership and how we keep it peaceful. But the idea now is to kind of delve in and study it just a bit deeper. So how do we do that, right? The first part is police power, right? Gives the government the ability to enforce regulations, thus creating regulations that govern zoning, planning, building codes, and health standards, which all fall under police power. So we as a people create a government that has police power and which in turn creates these regulations in order to govern this activity. So whereas they plan areas, and that has to do with zoning, right? They have building codes, which means that you're not going to build a property that's going to fall over and potentially kill somebody, right? And then you have health standards, which just to kind of give you an example, we have a rating system here in LA that rates the restaurants, and it's pretty much telling you, hey, you know what, we're rating this restaurant a certain way, but those are health standards that we're hoping that restaurant owner will pick up their standards a bit, whereas to potentially have an A on their restaurant, so then we as consumers can understand that person is complying with those health standards. But it has to do with ownership, with the ownership of the restaurant and their responsibility. Police power in real estate takes power out of the hands of the property owners and places it in the hands of government. In the United States, states' police power comes from the 10th Amendment of the Constitution. States are thus granted the power to establish and enforce laws protecting the bankruptcy, business law, real estate law, and intellectual property. The need for these governing managing bodies was now necessary to establish. So, see, not just were people fighting over a piece of property or maybe a lakefront, right? But they were also fighting over businesses. They were also fighting over intellectual property. We've all heard of, intellectual property being taken and or stolen and or mimicked so they can continue to profit from those things. And so we need police power to govern that in terms of ownership. Otherwise, if we don't, we fall back into the caveman days where you pretty much get a club and take what you want. So the justice system, law enforcement, and legal counsel were also important to establish. And these are all government entities that we as the people establish in order to protect our right to ownership. Does that make sense, guys? And I know you guys have seen the word police power in maybe some of your textbooks and even in the test, but this may have cleared up what that means and how it's used. Any questions or comments on that? So the creation of municipalities, right? So let's start with the definition, right? A city, town, or other district possessing corporate existence and usually its own local government. So just like here in the city of Whittier, there is a local government and they address local issues, and they also fund certain things when the city has money, and they also sometimes make things fun. But for the most part, it's necessary to have this function, again, to have the ability to protect my ownership in property and or even the use of property, just in business. So a community under municipal jurisdiction. So we also have smaller municipalities, towns or villages, right? Or even areas or districts, right? That aren't heavily populated, still need to be governed. And the governing body of such a district or community, right? So a municipal has to be made up of some of the police power, governmental establishments that we talked about in the previous slide, but there's also a bunch of other things that are created by the governing bodies of a local municipality, but also necessary in protecting our ownership rights, because now that we have an established court system, an established, let's say, county assessor for tax related purposes, we have an established county recorder, we have an established governing body in terms of, let's say, the city board, because now we have everybody kind of agreeing to the system. It's difficult now to deviate from that, which if anybody wants to try something else, if it happens to be better, which we haven't seen, it may actually take hold. But the majority of the time, really, these things are simply protecting your ownership from thieves, right? And that's, I could say that we're all in agreement that that's what we want. So pop quiz, what could be the difference between a city, town, or village? Anybody know the difference between those? And don't use my joke where I always say spelling, right? That's not the difference. But does anybody know the difference between a city, town, or a village? Anybody? All right, so I'll give you the answer. What do you say, Lupe?
I said a village is like where you harvest. And a town is where most of the homes are more close to each other.
Okay, well, no. This is the answer, is it's simply the size of the township and its use, right? And so really probably has more to do with size, but you mentioned harvest, right? You can have a city farm. I've actually seen them, okay? So just to give you an idea, it has less to do with um, how it's being used, but it has more to do with its size,
So is the
the
uh,
population,
how many people is in the city or
population. So in other words,
population?
yeah, you can't, if I tell you there's a population of 54, would you call that a city?
No.
Yeah, no, you wouldn't. But if I told you it was a population of 54, could you call that a village?
Yes.
That's the difference.
Okay.
That make,
Got it.
that make sense?
Yes.
Okay. Uh, but I was hoping that you guys could visualize that too, mainly because as we are, working our real estate files, some of these things become apparent. Like you might be in a suburban or rural area, right? Now it's not necessarily necessary to call something a city or a town or a village, but if you know the difference, sometimes it's easier to notice other things, right? So whereas ultimately what we're talking about here is ownership and the necessity for a municipal, meaning that we have a governing body. Governing body is the municipal. It's ultimately most cities that we're used to seeing around here are incorporated. There are areas of unincorporated. We have unincorporated parts of LA. There's a part of Whittier that is unincorporated on the south side, meaning that it belongs to the county and it does not belong to the city proper. But these things, us as real estate agents, it broadens our understanding of ownership in terms of what is necessary to have ownership. Because again, if we don't have municipals, who is fighting for our rights in real estate? And we would need the municipal to help fight that right to own. Any other questions or comments? So I won't get too far into municipal bonds. I'll read this really quick because it's really not that important, but it is something that exists and maybe something that you guys may not even know. So a municipal bond, commonly known as a mini bond, is a bond issued by local government or territory or one of other agencies, is generally used to finance public projects such as roads, schools, airports, and seaports, and infrastructure related repairs. The term municipal bond is commonly used in the US, which was the largest market of such trade-able securities in the world. As of 2011, the municipal bond market was valued at 3.7 trillion. Potential users of municipal bonds include cities, states, counties, redevelopment agencies, special purpose districts, school districts, public utility districts, publicity or publicly owned airports and seaports, and other governmental entities at or below the state level having more than a de minimis amount of one of the three sovereign powers: the power of taxation, the power of eminent domain, and or police power, right? And so these are municipal bonds which can be purchased, and the idea of purchasing them is that hopefully sometime they go up in value, right? But the idea behind them is that you're actually funding public projects, and talk about schools, parks, other development things, and Larry's popping back in here. So let's continue on. Municipal bonds may be obligations of the issuer or secured by specific revenues in the United States. Interest income received by holders of municipal bonds is often excluded from gross income for federal tax purposes under Section 103 of the Internal Revenue Code, and may be exempt from the state income tax as well, depending on the applicable state income tax laws. A state and local exemption was a subject of litigation. Okay, and these are the types of bonds that are out there that are available. Like I said, I won't spend a lot of time on this. Who can buy municipal bonds? And the answer is anyone with the ability to pay for it, otherwise known as the investor. Okay, so investors can invest into the municipals that are created, and we talked about what actually creates the municipal, and it's the population and its size, and how it's designated, and then how do these municipalities make money in order to build the infrastructure of the municipal? Well, they sell these bonds. Okay, and like I said, I won't spend a lot of time on it, but this is something that should be known, right? Now, there is something in some of the newer communities where instead of selling municipal bonds, what they do is they force the homeowners that buy in the area to pay taxes. Anybody know what kind of taxes that is?
That the Melrose?
Thank you, Lupe. It is Melrose. Melrose is a forced taxes on the homeowners of the municipal, and it is temporary, but for the most part, that is an enforced tax other than municipal bonds. So now you guys can see the difference between how some municipals are run, and then also how it affects the ownership of what we're talking about in terms of, let's just say, a single family residence, right? Any questions or comments on that? So let's do a quick funny, right? So homeowner association, more like nosy neighbors can't mind their own business. Where do I find this stuff? I'll tell you. So which one is this? The president of MySpace.com at home, right? So he just put all of his stuff and labeled it, right? Not sure why that's funny or why I thought it was funny, but.
So this is mine and this is mine.
Yeah, so ownership is probably the main reason why I had put this up. But for the most part, this the president of MySpace. So so there's something that we probably all saw on our real estate test, which is the bundle of rights, is a set of legal rights afforded by the real estate title holder. It can include the right of possession, right of control, right of exclusion, and the right of enjoyment and the right of disposition. Now, the right of disposition is the one that we're all familiar with. It's pretty much what it means is you have the right to sell, right? The other one is right of possession, meaning that, which is a bit convoluted, but right of possession means if you've been on the property for a legal amount of time, it becomes yours, right? And right of control. So we're going to go over some of these rights, but the bundle of rights, right, is something that we should all be familiar with, just in general, not literal. Like nobody's ever going to ask you to dictate, any of the bundle of rights, but you should at minimum know what they mean and how we use them in here in real estate. So the first one is the right of possession. The property is owned by whomever holds title. Once you close a real estate deal for cash and have the title in your hands, it's yours. Well, let's start out right away with the caveat that not paying property taxes and many association dues can get your property taken away from you. That said, when you have a deed in your name and no mortgage, note, or lien against the property, you own it. However, depending on the state in which you live and the laws there, the lien holder of the mortgage can quickly exercise the right to take the property, or they may have to go through the courts to do so. Okay, so that's the right of possession. So you pretty much own it, you can use it, right? The right of control, when within the laws, the owner controls the use of the property. Here's another warning: as you must adhere to any subdivision or homeowner association covenants and restrictions. So if you want to control your property by storing dead car bodies, um, but your covenants preclude that, then that control isn't yours. Likewise, if you want to have loud parties and let 24 people squat at your property, you won't be able to do that if there are covenants and restrictions that forbid it. So even though you have the right of control of your property, it's within the what we call CC&R's conditions, covenants, and restrictions of the deed. And typically you'll see that on a title report, and sometimes you'll see other restrictions, and then sometimes the municipal has certain restrictions. So understand that yes, you do have control of your property if you're the owner, but it's within the guidelines and restrictions of the municipal and also of the deed. And then of course, illegal activity. Illegal activity would fall under the police power rights of criminal law. Okay, so any questions or comments on those two? So we have right of possession, right of control. That's the first two. Okay, let's move on to the next one. So we have right of exclusion. Others can be excluded from using or entering the property. Generally, this one is pretty protected. You don't have to allow anyone to enter your owned property who isn't law enforcement with a warrant. However, there will likely be easements for things like utilities. Utility companies will have the right to enter the property to maintain their rights of way and utility lines as part of the easement. So yeah, we have the right of exclusion, meaning that we can exclude anybody who we don't want on the property, except for a law enforcement, which is part of police power, who has a warrant, which we understand, most of us understand those laws. And then there's also the ability for the utility companies who now service the properties to have an easement. An easement is simply just another word for the right to pass, right? They've been given the right to pass onto the property. Now, that doesn't mean that they can come on and have a party. No, what that means is that there might be like a telephone pole on the back corner of the house and maybe some power lines that go over the top of it somewhere. That would be typical of a utility easement. Now, most of the new utilities are actually in the ground. So instead, what you do is you find vaults on the ground, which are those like boxes that are on the ground that you see. Sometimes you might see a fire hydrant or something like that. But primarily these are exclusions from the right of exclusion, which simply means that the right of exclusion means is that you can exclude anybody from passing on your property. But then what we're talking about here are the folks that do have the right to pass, which one of them would be the utility, right? Any questions or comments on that one? So the right of enjoyment. The owner can enjoy the use of the property in any legal manner. We're back to that monster party and dozens of cult members thing. If that's how you want to enjoy your property, you can only do so if it's not restricted through subdivision or homeowners covenants or restrictions documents. And of course, if you are bothered or bothering your neighbors, there may be a city ordinance. So yeah, you can have as many parties as you want on your property. So you have the right to enjoyment. But if you're bothering other folks, that could potentially be breaking possibly a city ordinance or a local or state law. And there could be a time stamp on it, like, no partying after 10 o'clock or something like that. But for the most part, other than that, you have the right to enjoyment. So you can sit down and read a book and, drink a tea or a cup of coffee and enjoy your property without being bothered by others as well. So that's the other part of it. Any questions or comments on that? All right, so let's keep moving. So rights in real estate continue. So we have the right of disposition, right? So this is the familiar one that we're familiar with. The title holder can sell, rent, or transfer ownership or use of the property at will, unless you have a mortgage, as that must be paid off to dispose of the property. You generally can sell it at will. Of course, if the IRS has a tax lien on your property, then you'll have to pay that off as part of the settlement money. This applies as well to mechanics liens for work done on the property or improvements. So one of the bundles of rights we have here in ownership, okay, is the right of disposition, right? So that's the legal term, but really what it means is the right to sell, the right to rent, right? Or the right to transfer. You can transfer it to a son or daughter, right? But you have those rights in ownership in the bundle of rights. Any questions or comments on that? So ownership of land is holding title to it. The evidence of that title is the deed. The seller executes a deed to transfer title to real property and the bundle of rights that go with it. So the bundle of rights is something that is inherent to us here in the US. That could change, and it does change often with tax laws. Sometimes municipal laws change sometimes. And sometimes even what we talked about in terms of the Melleroos, sometimes even bond laws could change or bond rules can change, right? But for the most part, the bundle of rights speaks for itself. It gives you the right of enjoyment, the right of disposition, right? And so on and so forth. Was there any, I would think there's some more here. Title insurance is how we protect those rights and claims against them. When a property changes hands and title insurance is purchased by or for the new owner, they're supposedly protected against frivolous or erroneous claims on their ownership rights. So that's the goal. The goal when you buy title insurance, the goal is to have a professional now looking at the title and pretty much ensuring the homeowner that there are no flaws in that title. Because if there is something that pops up and there are imperfections in the system, that's what the title insurance is for. Now this isn't a title insurance presentation, but it does fall under that umbrella when it comes to ownership. So any questions or comments on that? So now we're going to fall into what a deed is. Okay, so the definition of a deed is a signed and usually sealed instrument containing some legal transfer, bargain, or contract. So a deed, anciently in evidence, is any legal instrument in writing which passes, affirms, or confirms an interest, right, or property, and that is signed, attested, delivered, and in some jurisdictions sealed. It is commonly associated with the transferring or conveyancing title of property. The deed has a greater presumption of validity and is less rebutable than an instrument signed by the party to the deed. A deed can be unilateral or bilateral. Deeds include conveyances, commissions, licenses, patents, diplomas, and conditionally power of attorney if executed as deeds. The deed is the modern descendant of the medieval charter, and delivery is thought to symbolically replace the ancient ceremony of livery of season. Now, I included the that term just because when I was doing research on deeds, this came up, and I've never heard it before, but apparently this is what used to be a deed, right? Was livery of season, and what we now call a deed, or we used to be a deed was an evidence, but now it's a deed. So there was an evolution of what it used to be called. So a livery of season is an archaic legal conveyancing ceremony formerly practiced in feudal England and in other countries following English common law, used to convey holdings in property. So there was actually a ceremony that used to be held when there was a conveyance of a property from one person to another. So as to some of the history of the deed, but what's important here is, and probably should have underlined it, is it's a legal instrument in writing, right? And it goes back to what I always say, it's not what you know, it's what you can prove. When we say legal, what it means is it's including the community or the municipal, in this case, the recorder's office, and then the municipal that the recorder's office is in. So when we go to the recorder's office here in Los Angeles, it's the LA County Recorder's Office, but there's also one in San Bernardino, there's also one in Riverside, so on and so forth. All of the counties have their own establishments to protect these legal instruments. And so that's what we are pretty much using on a daily basis. These are the deeds that now are conveying our rights in real estate and our protection of it in terms of ownership. Any questions or comments on that? So, oh, actually, okay, we're on slide number 18, so we're actually doing good on time. We see real estate as a building or a plot of land, but real estate is the rights to it. Those rights are protected by the establishment around us, whether it be the roads, curbs, or streetlights. The investors that invest to build those utilities, or the municipals that govern them. And I will also say protect them. We have evolved to a place where you can use, be private, convey, enjoy, or derive income from your rights in real estate. We effectively use instruments such as deeds to convey a protective sentiment. As real estate agents and professionals, understanding these rights gives us the ability to help others realize their wants and dreams. So this paragraph actually is very important to the system that we use today, and its ability now for us to realize something different that we didn't talk about in this presentation, but is ultimately the goal, and that's profit. There's nothing that we see, wear, eat, use, nothing that doesn't have profit built into it. But how do we get that profit? Well, if the ownership piece of the puzzle wasn't figured out and wasn't highly established and protected, we would have the inability to profit. And so it's very important to understand why it's important to do the things that we do in real estate, and some of the paperwork that we have to deal with in terms of ownership. Why it's important to include title insurance. Why it's important to make sure that the spelling and the vesting and the dates are all correct on deeds. And it's because they can create problems. So your eyes become the deciding factor, right? And what I would think to improve is your professionalism in doing so, because you certainly don't want to come across an escrow company that's kind of lackadaisical and really doesn't care about too much about the validity of a deed that they drew up. It's important for us as listing agents to look at those deeds and to verify that they are correct before your client signs them, right? I wouldn't even go as far as saying have an attorney look at them, right? We shouldn't take that for granted. But for the most part, it goes back to how we started the presentation in terms of, hey, this is the alternative to just beating each other up with clubs to get what we want. The alternative is a peaceful solution to use these inventions, because a municipal is an invention, a deed is an invention, the bundle of rights are all inventions, but they're logical, cognitive inventions. These inventions help us stay peaceful, and it allows us to do business with a smile. And isn't that what we want? You know, the reason why I'm saying all this is because I think a lot of people take these things for granted, even to the point of even trying to steal other people's rights, kind of laughing at the whole establishment. And Larry might have some things to interject on that, because I've heard some title companies going after people and prosecuting them because whether it be a false notary or whether it be somebody that really was just trying to steal title of a property, there's probably many horror stories. I know I had First American Title on my show some years back, And we talked very specifically about sting operation that was going on at an escrow company by a title company. And they actually narrowed down this guy that was going around putting himself on title on certain properties. So, this is not something that we should take lightly. And so I thought it important to cover the concepts, number one, of where it came from, um, the concept of where it is, and what can we do to improve it. I'll be honest with you, I can't really think of anything off the hip to improve the current ownership establishment that we have right now. I don't know of anything. I probably come up with some things as the days go, just kind of off the wall. But for the most part, we should all practice that, because what we're interested in is peace. But the other part of it is that we're also interested in profiting. If all of us are not profiting, the world is not turning the way that it should. So this is why it's very important that we all profit in one way or another. Because what it means is that the monies that's coming from one person is going through you and out to another person. It needs to flow that way. It's just community, right? But how does all that happen? Through the establishment of ownership. We own our cars, we own our clothes, we own our homes, and it doesn't matter if we rent or purchase. We own the rights to it in terms of the right of enjoyment. If we rent, we own the right of enjoyment through a contract. So the ownership just doesn't talk about what we own, because yeah, there's also the ability to finance and have liens on those things as collateral, right? So there's a breakdown a little bit of ownership in terms of owning something outright, but the concept of ownership hasn't changed. It stays the same. So anyway, that said, guys, we're almost done here with the presentation. Any questions or comments? So just a reminder again about the YouTube channel. Anybody who wants to see any previous presentations, as I mentioned before, there's probably, after today, there'll probably be 34 or 35 on the channel that are available to view. You guys are welcome to go on anytime. It's free. Anybody that you'd like to visit the channel, please share the channel with them. They're welcome to get on and watch as well. Just do me a favor and have them subscribe if possible, so we can get credit for the views, okay? The link, I send it out to you by email every week with the invite to this presentation. So obviously you can't click on the one here, but the link is on that email. Okay, so anybody that doesn't have the link or isn't getting it or whatever the case is, email me or call me and I'll get it to you. Okay, but you guys are more than welcome to watch the presentations as much as you want. I'm hoping that it is as informative as it needs to be, because we are coming up to getting close to almost having all the presentations that I have made completed. We won't be having that many more live presentations, but I was mentioning to Larry earlier that I'll be making some new ones. One of them I already have is the Avid. I already have that one, so that one will be coming up here in the next couple of weeks. But I'll be making some new ones. Primarily, everybody's been begging me for the new RPA, which I'll be honest with you, isn't that much different than the old one. They just structured it differently. But we'll talk about it. There are some things to think about, and how to interpret on the new RPA. Okay, I want to do one. I'm going to be doing some how-to presentations, which probably won't require a live class. I'm just going to record them and put them on the channel. I'll let you guys know when I do that, so you guys can view them. But I'm going to do how to look up a property on public record, how to run comps. I know I did that on the appraisal presentation, but I'll do just one just by itself, whether it be on MLS or whether it be on Realist. Okay, and how do I pinpoint what comps to use? Okay, because there is a difference between a sale and a comparable. If a house is 2,000 square feet against a house that is 1,300 square feet, they are not comparable. So you can't call it a comp. It's simply just a sale. Okay, the word comparable does mean something. Okay. But we'll get into that now in the presentation. The other one I want to cover is the sellers affidavit and IRC 1445, which has to do with the withholding of tax monies for a non-resident alien. Seems to be a lot of confusion about that. The other one I want to cover, and there'll be some how-to on that one too, how to put a signature pack together on zip forms. I'm gonna do a how-to video on that. I'll probably do a presentation on procuring cause. I know there's some attorneys that I've seen do some podcasts on it. Very interesting subject, but I think something we should all know as agents about procuring cause and really getting in contact with somebody else's client. Not a good idea. You can lose your commissions. Okay. But anyway, that said, let's continue on to, I forgot to do the animation on this one, but let's just put them up here real quick. For Mr. Larry, there's his phone number and email address. Mr. Larry is with Older Public Title, and he actually is religiously coming onto the presentations. So I consider him to be a partner. So give him a call. You guys have any questions or comments or need help with anything, Mr. Larry is your man. Okay. There's Irias Mortgage with Elizabeth Montes. She's a broker and loan agent here at the office. She can give you, if you need it, pre-approvals for VA, FHA, conventional loans. Anybody looking for motivational training, which I don't necessarily do here, although I try, at least think that I try to be motivational at times. But I'm not as good as Dave, and so this is why I do support his product and endorse his product. There's his meeting ID and password. It's every Saturday at 8:15. They're pretty religious about it. Dave is very good at what he does, and some of the things he talks about are very interesting. So feel free to get on it. It's free for Saturdays. Obviously, he charges during the week because he is a real estate coach, but he can't help on that end. And anybody that has interest and or questions on natural hazard disclosure or NHD, there's Shameen. She's with Property ID, and there's her information if you should happen to need or have any questions concerning NHD. They are errors and omissions insured, and this is the reason why I like to use them. Okay, and also very thorough. And then of course there's my information. So actually everything that you need on the business side of real estate is on this screen. Myself, in terms of transaction coordinating and or assisting in real estate transactions, Larry for title, Liz for loans, Shameen for NHD, and then of course a motivational pat on the back, if you will, to go get business would be Mr. Dave. All right, so we haven't seen Dave come on. Maybe one of these days I'll have Dave come and do come and visit us on a training that we might do, so he can talk about that, and maybe he can get you guys to visit him. I do endorse his product mainly because of how he comes across in his motivation, because I'll tell you, the times that I've gone onto his classes, I get motivated. Okay, so I mean, I don't know if that says something necessarily, but all I know is it works for me. Okay, so I wanted to share that with you guys. So anyway, that said, we are at the end of part 1 of title and ownership. So come visit us next week for part 2. Anybody who's interested, there's my information and also my my email address. My website is down at the moment. Hopefully I get that up in the next couple of weeks, but please invite those who you think might benefit from this, and or you can invite them to the channel just to view. Okay, so other than that, guys, any other questions or comments on title and ownership? You know, I really like putting this presentation together. The research that I did on it kind of took me on some different roads that I was originally thinking, but it came out. I was happy with how it came out. I really was happy because it's pointing out the reasons why we have the establishment that we do, and I think it's important. I think as real estate professionals, we should know and understand these things. Whereas, you know, as we're going through our normal travels, we can recognize any problems. And I think that's important, because if we recognize problems and we're able to fix some of these things, you know, it puts a big S on our chest, like Superman or Superwoman, right? And that's kind of what we want with our clients. We want to be able to look good with their clients after we close a deal. Whereas, you know, they'll give us referrals, because that's what we're after. We're after their referrals. And potentially a client could be good for 3 or 4 referrals. Well, imagine how that works exponentially. Somebody that's been in the business for a long time should have a good clientele, because their referral base just continues to grow. And I think that's probably one of the most important things in real estate, because ultimately, a lot of times that's how agents kind of phase out, and why there's new ones coming in all the time. So I call it the revolving door. But anybody who has chosen to be in real estate, you know, should want to do it to the point of retirement. And once you're retired, you can say, yeah, I was a real estate agent all those years and I did well. So anyway, that said, any questions or comments or anything? Thank you, Chandra, you're very welcome. Sully and Robert, you guys are welcome. I think Sully and Robert probably have seen this one before, but this is a refresher from some years back. I did do some improving. Anytime I do a presentation and I'm going to record it, I do try and improve them a bit and go through them to make sure that, you know, the spellings are there and what have you. Victoria, thank you. Good to see you again. You're welcome, and hope to see you guys next week. Unless there's any questions or comments or anything you guys want to talk about, I'm going to sign off. You guys are kind of quiet today, so I assume that everything that I said, you understand. Because sometimes, I'll be honest with you, some of the things I say, sometimes I don't understand. I have to go back and think about it. But it's interesting when you're putting these presentations together, doing the research on them. You know, like I said, sometimes it takes you in different directions, but it's interesting to read on some of these subject matters versus just the text. You know, if you're reading the textbook, you know, it's giving you the definitions and the meaning, but sometimes you got to get different commentary to understand. So doing the research or just Googling a word sometimes will give you that information. And that's how I fell on the information about human rights, how I fell on the information about serfs and people that work the land to pay their rent, you know, because they didn't have a regular job to make money to pay rent. What they could do is work the land. You know, most of us don't have those opportunities. We don't have the opportunity to go, you know, pick avocados and the person who owns the avocado field gives us a place to live. You know, that is probably something that's probably still exists, but something that we're not familiar with. So I just thought some of that stuff is interesting, and we could talk about it, right? Other than that, guys, it's 7 o'clock, so we actually did good on time today, which is good because I have to go pick up my daughter. But other than that, I'll see you guys next week on part 2. Unless there's anything else, I want to go and sign off, all right? All right, well, you guys have a good evening. I'll see you guys next week.